Now, Dr. Karan Singh will give us his dynamic message. And now I request the doctor to come and assist.
Swamiji and friends, why is it that of all the great civilizations that have flourished in the long and tortuous history of mankind, it is India alone that has been able to maintain an unbroken link with its past, with the very dawn of civilization? There have been other very great civilizations. There was Babylon and Mesopotamia, and the civilization of Egypt, and the great South American civilizations of the Aztecs and the Mayas, and numerous other such flowerings of the human spirit. But all of them are dead and broken. And today they live on either in the four walls of museums or in the minds of a few research scholars. But in India, we still maintain unbroken the golden link with our past. And this despite the fact that our history has been among the most turbulent of any nations in the world. We have had invasions and we have had turmoil which would have broken the back of any other civilization, and yet India survives. Why is this? I think it is because whenever dark clouds have gathered over this country, whenever the forces of evil and of disruption have gathered strength, and it has appeared that India is finally going to succumb, great men and women have been born who have relighted the torch of faith and of hope, who have re-illuminated the darkness that was gathering over the country, who by their teachings and by their lives have brought new hope and new vigor and new inspiration to the people of this country. The whole of Indian history can be looked upon in this view. Right from the age of the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Buddha, the advent of Shankara, the great medieval saints and philosophers and singers, and so on right up to the present day, there has been this extraordinary phenomenon of the greatest people arriving at the darkest moment. Sri Krishna was born on a night when it was dark and it was thunder, lightning, and it appeared as if the forces of evil were finally going to succeed. It was at that time, in the prison of our hearts, that the Lord descended. And similarly, through the ages, this has happened. And one such period was the middle of the 19th century. I would like to try and take your mind back to 1857, when the Indian Mutiny, or as it is now called, the First Indian War of Independence, ended in failure. And India lay prostrate and broken before the feet of her foreign conquerors. And it was a bondage far deeper than a mere physical subordination, because people had begun to lose faith in those very values of its culture that had kept it alive since the dawn of history. People had begun to feel that our spiritual heritage, our cultural background, was in fact a weakness rather than a strength. And people had begun to turn away from the Indian heritage and to lose all hope in a new regeneration. Everything at that time was dark, and it appeared as if India was finally going to succumb and was going to cease as a continuous civilization. But then once again the miracle happened. Once again there was a mighty resurgence which began in Bengal, the first province to feel the impact of British rule. It began perhaps with Raja Ram Mohan Roy and his extraordinary movement for emancipation within the body of Hinduism. The founding of the Brahmo Samaj, the Adi Brahmo Samaj and the Brahmo Samaj of India by Devendranath Thakur and Keshav Chandra Sen. The founding of the Prarthana Samaj in Maharashtra by Ranade and Bhandarkar. The founding of the Arya Samaj in Punjab by Swami Dayananda Saraswati. The Theosophical Society and numerous other movements grew up. But above all, there was the advent of Sri Ramakrishna, surely one of the most remarkable men ever to have appeared in this country's long history. a man who, though completely unlettered, was able to inspire a whole generation of people, a man who became a beacon of spiritual power and light for the people of India who had lost faith in themselves and in their country, a man to whose feet were attracted the greatest and the lowliest, the princes and the paupers, the rich and the poor. People from all corners of the country flocked to Sri Ramakrishna's feet, and of the people who came to him, the most remarkable was Narendranath Datta, later to be known as Swami Vivekananda. Between them, they provided an extraordinary Guru-Shishya relationship, one that even today is a subject for endless fascination. When you find the meeting of two great souls, the contact of two great spirits, and as the result, one of the most remarkable developments in our intellectual and spiritual life. Swami Vivekananda himself lived only for 39 years. When one thinks what he achieved in that short period, one is really utterly astounded. Because within a short period of 39 years, he packed in a life of dedication and devotion. It is a fascinating story. I must resist the temptation to go into too many details about his life, because they are all fascinating. His boyhood, the difficulties that he encountered in his student life, his dramatic meeting with the master, then his disciplehood, then after Sri Ramakrishna's passing away, he is wandering as an itinerant monk, the length and breadth of India, Setu Himalaya Paryantam, mingling with the people of India, getting to know the soul of India, the heart of India. Then his dramatic visit abroad, where he burst upon the University of Religions at Chicago like a meteor, and then subsequently his work in England and in America, his return to India as a conquering hero, his tour from Kanyakumari to Kashmir, then his founding of the Belur Mutt in Calcutta and the Ramakrishna Mission, and finally his passing away. In this short life of his, Swamiji achieved virtually a miracle, a complete restatement of Hinduism to meet the requirements of the modern age. And I would submit that Swamiji's message really even transcended Hinduism. It was in a way a message of hope for entire mankind. And I think that today, more than perhaps ever before, his message is needed again. Because today, once again, we face a crisis. The old is dying and the new is struggling to be born. And our generation is caught between the past and the future. There is a groping among the younger generations for a new light and a new certitude. And I would submit that once again the message of Swami Vivekananda can act as a source of inspiration and a source of guidance for this country. I will try and put before you this afternoon, as I understand it, the salient features of this message. I entirely agree with Swamiji when he says that it is difficult really to understand fully and to interpret Vivekananda, and yet we must make the attempt, because if we merely turn back saying that it is a difficult task, we will not be able to gain from him what he can give to the country. And I would say that his message is summed up best in his own words, where he says, "My ideal indeed can be put into a few words, to preach unto mankind their divinity and how to make it manifest in every movement of life." As I see it, there are 5 main aspects of this message which I will seek to place before you. The first is the unity of all religions. I say unity, not tolerance, because tolerance, although a desirable thing, is essentially a negative sentiment. By tolerance we mean that all right, we will permit other religions apart from our own also to continue. But that is not good enough. We have got to move from the tolerance of all religions towards the acceptance of the fact that all religions are indeed so many different ways to the same goal. This was something that Sri Ramakrishna proved by his own sadhana. And this is something that is deeply rooted in our own heritage. The Rig Veda has it, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. The truth is one, the wise call it by many names. The Mundaka Upanishad has a beautiful mantra. Yatha nadya syandamana samudre astam gachanti nam rupe vihaya tatha vidvan nam rupat vimuktaha parat param purusham apeti divyam. As streams may arise from different parts of the country but flow ultimately into the same great ocean, so do religious disciplines and religions and doctrines and dogmas and philosophies arise in different parts of the world but ultimately flow towards the same divine goal. And it is therefore that Swamiji always preached the fact that religious disciplines, of whatever kind they may be, were so many different attempts by mankind, conditioned by their environment, their history, their geography, their economics, their peculiar cultural and historical background, but nevertheless attempts striving towards the same goal. And today, I think this is a message which has got to be fully understood, not only by the Hindus but by every religious community in the world. So much has been done in the name of religion, so much good, and yet how much cruelty has been perpetrated in the name of religion, how much suffering has been brought about in the name of religion. Surely religion is something that binds man to man with an indissoluble link, rather than divides him into warring camps. And therefore I think today we need to reiterate once again this first basic aspect of Swamiji's teachings, the unity of all religions, regardless of where they may have been born or what particular dogma they may preach. The second and closely allied aspect of his teachings is the divinity of man. Not the divinity of God. After all, if God exists, he is divine. There's nothing very special about it. He is divine by definition. We have got to move forwards from the concept of the divinity of God to the concept of the divinity of man. Amritasya putraha, that is what the Upanishads call mankind. Children of immortality. Every man who comes into this earth contains within him a spark of the divine. The light of heaven shines on every human soul. And therefore, there is this indissoluble link, linking everybody in the human race one to the other. It is a link that cuts across religious disciplines, that cuts across race and language and color and creed and caste and nationality. It is a link that binds people together as one human family. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. And today we live in an age of science and technology. Aviation, the aspect with which I myself deal, has knit this world literally into one. Planes flying faster than sound will soon be traveling throughout the world. And it will be possible within a few hours to circumnavigate this globe. Today, more than ever before, this aspect of the divinity of man and therefore the unity of humanity is something which has got to be reiterated. And this was something that Swamiji constantly preached, whether in India or abroad, that the things that divide man are very small and petty and insignificant when compared with the real thing that unites people, and that is their commonly shared divinity. And therefore, the divinity of man is the second aspect of his teachings that I would like particularly to highlight. The third aspect is the dignity of the individual and the service of society. After all, if man is divine, each individual has got to be treated as if he possesses an inalienable dignity. It is not enough merely to preach a doctrine of divinity of mankind and yet to treat men as worse than cattle and worse than sheep. And this was a new nuance, a new angle that Swamiji gave, because in this country there has been a long tradition of spiritual sadhana, of spiritual striving, but very often it took the form of the person leaving society and going off into the Himalayas to seek enlightenment. Certainly that is a very noble thing, but perhaps nobler still is the remaining in society and serving it from within. And this aspect of service to society is something that Swamiji always highlighted. He tried to bring about a fusion between intense activity and deep meditation. He rejected the necessity for everybody who wished to pursue the divine goal to get away from society. And therefore he preached that we must stay in society and we must fight the ridiculous superstitions and taboos that had gone by the name of religion in the past. And therefore Swamiji thundered against these absurdities, against, for example, an evil like untouchability that had become part and parcel of our social custom, that had tried to put on the mantle of religion and thereby tried to give itself respectability. Swamiji was very clear in his mind. He thundered against the so-called kitchen religion. He said that if your religion is so weak that it is going to be broken or soiled by touching somebody, then the sooner this religion breaks, the better for you and for mankind. Because no religion can really be of any use if it is based upon such a weak foundation. And he also said that we must serve the people. He said it is a sin to preach religion to somebody who is starving. This is a great statement by a man of religion, by a great religious leader. He said, first of all, you have got to serve the poor, you have got to serve the downtrodden. Then only can you preach to them religion. It is no use merely preaching religion in the comfortable precincts of temples, while people outside starve and beg for food. It is no use preaching the divine doctrine, the sublime doctrines of Vedanta, when in fact in the villages you do not allow people even to use a common well because by birth they happen to come from a certain community. This is something that Swamiji boldly opposed. And indeed, if you look at Indian history and culture, you will find that in our best moments, we have always been broad-minded. For example, there was a time when the people of India went abroad across the seas and spread the message of India to the whole of Southeast Asia. And then there came a time when anybody who went abroad had to perform prayashchitta or purification when he came home before he was admitted back into the fold. Just look at the difference between the two. Look at the sublimity, the divinity of the Vedanta doctrine and the absurdity of these caste strictures and taboos that for so many years and centuries have masqueraded under the name of religion. And therefore Swamiji was absolutely clear in his mind. He said, I preach a religion of the divinity of man and of the service of Daridra Narayana. And I think today also this message is important. Because today also, although we have achieved our independence, there are large sections of people who are still in great want. And therefore those of us who believe in religion cannot merely look to our own welfare and to our own salvation. We have got to be imbued once again with this zeal for social service and social reform. It is an unfortunate aspect that since independence somehow, the whole spirit seems to have gone out of our social reform movements. I think we now feel that just because we have passed various acts in Parliament and the state legislatures, our job is done and there is nothing more for us to do. This is indeed a grave mistake. As Swamiji pointed out then, at the end of the last century, and that is true today, that as long as there is a single Indian without adequate food, or without clothing, or without shelter, or a single child who has not got education, we cannot say that our freedom is complete, and we cannot say that our task of serving society has been done. And therefore the third aspect of Swamiji's teaching was the necessity for service to society, Atmano Mokshartham Jagat Hitaya. You work for your own salvation, but also for the welfare of the world. Bahujana Sukhaya, Bahujana Hitaya. This is an aspect that we had lost in between, and which Swamiji once again reiterated with all the power and all the eloquence at his command. The fourth aspect is his deep and abiding love for India. When he swam across from Kanyakumari to the rock off the foot of Mother India where three great oceans mingle, and he sat there and he looked up at this great country, this nation that has nurtured us for centuries, this nation that has seen so much suffering and yet so much achievement, this nation that has alternated between triumph and tragedy, between shadow and sunlight. He saw India and he saw it not merely as a conglomeration of earth and rock and stone and water, but as a living entity. And he had a vision of a new and a resurgent India. He had a vision of India which would be free, Please remember that when he was at the Rock, India was still under foreign domination. He saw the vision of a new, free India, and an India that would take its rightful place among the great nations of the world. Today, of course, we are free, and all of us claim to be patriotic. We join easily enough in the singing of the national anthem and the hoisting of the national flag. But when smaller loyalties come to the fore, whether it is language or caste or creed or party or politics or any such thing, somehow our love for the country tends to get rather diluted. And we get more involved in our smaller petty squabbles than in the broad vision of a new India. Swamiji taught this love for India, which is something far deeper than the rather lukewarm patriotism that everybody professes. And finally, Swamiji saw India not only for itself, but for the world. Because an intense love for one's own country can often degenerate into a dangerously narrow and chauvinism. Swamiji was very clear. He said that India seeks freedom not only for itself, but for the whole world. Because he felt that India had a message for the world. And here, another great saint and philosopher, Sri Aurobindo, also had this concept. The concept that India, the freedom of India was important not only for India, but as part of a world community. And that the message of India, the message of a unity of religions, of the divinity of man, of the unity of the human race, is something which is not to be confined merely within the boundaries of our country, but which is to embrace the entire human race. These, to my mind, these concepts are still as valid today as they ever were at that time. In fact, perhaps they are more valid than before, because today the responsibility upon us is greater. We are a free nation. We no longer have a convenient alibi of placing the blame upon other people. We are the generation that has got to make this country. And what did Swamiji say about the means for attaining this? He advocated inner strength. He said, and here is the test of truth. Anything that makes you weak, physically, intellectually, and spiritually, reject as poison. There is no life in it. It cannot be true. Truth is strengthening. And therefore he wanted the power, not the asuric power that oppresses other people, that seeks to impose its will by force upon others, but the Daivik Shakti, the Shakti without which nothing can be achieved. And he made a special appeal to the young at that time. He said, we want youth with muscles of iron and nerves of steel. We want that youth today also. I am very happy to see this evening in the audience several young people. I would particularly urge that the youth of this nation recapture something of the vibrant vision of Swami Vivekananda. Today we are free. We have a great future, there is no doubt whatsoever in it. But we have got to once again rededicate ourselves to the task of serving our nation, of serving society, and of serving the world. It is a difficult path, certainly. But no nation ever becomes great without facing difficulties. No great undertaking is ever finally achieved unless in the way there are all sorts of obstacles, because these bring out, the challenges bring out the power in us. And that is why Swamiji always used to say, be not afraid of the challenges that you may find in your path. It is indeed a difficult path, sharp as unto the razor's edge, and it is beset with difficulties. And yet we must not fear, because if we have full confidence in ourselves, we will succeed. And therefore, my dear friends, I will close my short talk this evening by repeating the great message of the Katha Upanishad that Swamiji always used to say and that he used to repeat. Arise, awake, and follow the path that has been laid out before us. Follow it right until you reach the goal. Do not be afraid of the difficulties, but with deep devotion and dedication, with an unshakable confidence in your own spiritual destiny, move ahead. Uttishtata jagrataha prapya varan nibodhata. Shurasya dhara durata nirattaya durgam pathastat kavayo vedanti.